Ever met a man who lives by himself and seems completely at peace with it? No wife waiting at home. No girlfriend. No obvious search for one, either. He comes home to a quiet apartment, makes his own plans, spends his evenings however he wants, and somehow doesn't appear lonely. To other people, that can be confusing. They start asking questions. Doesn't he want someone? Is he afraid of commitment? Did something happen to him? But sometimes, none of those explanations are true. Sometimes, a man is alone because being alone genuinely works for him. That doesn't mean he hates people. It doesn't mean he's incapable of love or intimacy. And it certainly doesn't mean every man who enjoys solitude is secretly unhappy. The more interesting question is why some people can live alone for years and feel completely satisfied, while others experience even a short period of solitude as something they need to escape. Part of the answer begins with autonomy. In psychology, autonomy is closely connected to the feeling that you have meaningful control over your own life. Your time belongs to you. Your decisions are yours. Your environment reflects your preferences rather than a constant negotiation with someone else. For some men, that sense of independence is deeply rewarding. They decide when to wake up. They choose how to spend the weekend. They can work late, change plans at the last minute, sit in silence, travel alone, or spend an entire evening doing absolutely nothing without needing to explain themselves. That freedom can create a kind of mental calm that outsiders often mistake for isolation. Of course, relationships involve compromise. That's part of sharing a life with another person. But for someone who strongly values personal autonomy, constant compromise can feel expensive if the relationship itself isn't bringing enough value to justify the sacrifice. And that creates an important shift in perspective. Instead of asking, why doesn't he have a relationship? The better question may be, what would a relationship need to add to a life he already enjoys? For a man who is genuinely comfortable alone, a partner isn't automatically the missing piece of a puzzle. She would need to become a meaningful addition to a life that already feels complete. And that brings us to another reason some men are perfectly content living alone. They can be emotionally connected without being romantically dependent. A person doesn't need a spouse or girlfriend to experience belonging. Friendships can provide companionship. Family can provide emotional support. Work can provide purpose and social interaction. Communities, hobbies, teams, and creative projects can all create meaningful bonds. When those areas of life are healthy, romance stops being the only possible source of connection. This doesn't mean friendship and romantic love are identical. They aren't. But it does mean that a man whose emotional needs are already supported may not feel the same urgency to find a partner as someone who is relying on a relationship to solve loneliness, boredom, or a lack of purpose. His life may already contain people he trusts, already contain things that matter to him, already give him reasons to get out of bed in the morning. So a relationship becomes a choice rather than an emotional emergency. And there is a major psychological difference between those two things. When you believe you need someone to feel complete, being single can feel like a problem that must be fixed. But when you already feel emotionally stable, being single is simply one possible way of living. That stability often gives a person another advantage: clarity. Many people enter relationships without really knowing what they want. They know they don't want to be alone, so they focus on finding someone rather than asking whether that particular person and relationship actually fit the life they want. But a man who has spent significant time on his own may have already learned what works for him. He knows how much personal space he needs. He knows what kind of lifestyle he enjoys. He knows which behaviors drain him and which ones bring him peace. He may also have a much clearer understanding of the kind of relationship he would actually want. And once someone reaches that level of clarity, they often become less willing to enter a relationship simply because one is available. From the outside, this can look like excessive standards. People might call him too selective or assume he's waiting for perfection. But knowing what doesn't work for you isn't the same as expecting perfection from everyone else. Imagine you've spent years building a routine you genuinely enjoy. Your finances are under control. Your home feels peaceful. You have friends, interests, goals, and freedom. Now imagine meeting someone. The question is no longer simply, do I like this person? The question becomes much larger. Would sharing my life with this person make my life better? That is a much higher standard than simply wanting to avoid being alone. And sometimes the honest answer is no. That doesn't mean the other person is bad. It may simply mean the relationship would cost more peace than it creates. But there's another reason solitude becomes easier for some people over time. The brain learns from experience. If being alone repeatedly leads to boredom, rejection, sadness, or isolation, a person may begin associating solitude with something negative. But the opposite can happen too. Suppose living alone gives someone uninterrupted time to think. They become more productive. They develop hobbies. They sleep better. They enjoy controlling their environment. They discover that a quiet evening can feel restorative instead of empty. Repeated experiences like that teach the brain something different. Being alone starts to feel safe, then enjoyable. Eventually, it may become the person's preferred state. What originally looked like an absence gradually becomes a source of comfort. This is one reason people who have lived independently for a long time can become remarkably comfortable in their own company. They aren't sitting around waiting for life to begin. Their life is already happening. And once someone learns how to enjoy their own presence, they become less vulnerable to the pressure of entering the wrong relationship simply to avoid silence. That may be one of the most misunderstood parts of this entire subject. Society often treats romantic partnership as a universal finish line. Go to school, build a career, find someone, settle down. Anyone who steps away from that sequence can appear to be falling behind. But not everyone wants the same life. And more importantly, not everyone experiences fulfillment through the same structure. Some people genuinely thrive in long-term partnerships. Others prefer independence. Some move between both throughout different stages of life. The mistake is assuming that one model represents success and everything else represents failure. A man living alone isn't automatically waiting for someone to rescue him from his own existence. He may simply have stopped measuring his life according to expectations he never personally chose. That doesn't mean relationships are unimportant. It means a relationship isn't automatically valuable simply because it exists. For someone who is content alone, the relationship has to offer something real: trust, companionship, affection, shared growth, emotional safety, or a life that feels richer together than apart. If it doesn't, remaining single may actually be the healthier option. And this leads to the assumption people get wrong more than any other. They see a man living alone and immediately imagine avoidance. Maybe he's running from intimacy. Maybe he's afraid of commitment. Maybe he can't attract anyone. Maybe he's secretly miserable. Those possibilities can exist. Solitude is not always healthy, and isolation can sometimes hide pain. But you cannot determine the reason simply by looking at the fact that someone lives alone. There is a huge difference between being isolated and choosing solitude. Isolation is often experienced as unwanted disconnection. Solitude can be a chosen state that feels peaceful, restorative, and meaningful. From the outside, the two can look almost identical. One man sits alone in his apartment because nobody is calling and he desperately wishes things were different. Another sits in a similar apartment because he enjoys the quiet and has consciously chosen to spend the evening that way. The environment may look the same. The psychological experience is completely different. That distinction matters, because a man who enjoys living alone may not be rejecting love at all. He may simply be unwilling to exchange a peaceful life for a relationship that brings constant conflict, instability, or emotional exhaustion. In fact, being comfortable alone can sometimes make someone more capable of choosing relationships for healthier reasons. If you don't desperately need another person to save you from loneliness, You have more freedom to ask whether the connection is actually good for you. You can walk away from situations that aren't working. You can wait without feeling like every year spent single is evidence that something has gone wrong. And you can enter a relationship because you genuinely want that specific person in your life, not because you can't tolerate an empty house. That is a very different foundation. Of course, none of this means every man who lives alone has mastered life. Humans are complicated. Someone can value independence and still experience loneliness. Someone can enjoy solitude while also wanting intimacy. Someone can remain single because of preference, circumstances, loss, past experiences, or simply because they haven't met the right person. There is no single psychological explanation. But the central idea is simple. Being alone and being unhappy are not the same thing. A quiet home isn't automatically an empty life. And the absence of a romantic partner doesn't automatically mean the absence of connection, purpose, or fulfillment. Sometimes the man everyone assumes is missing something has simply discovered that his own company is enough to make an ordinary day feel peaceful. He may still welcome love if it arrives. He may still want companionship, but he doesn't need to chase a relationship just to prove that his life has value. And perhaps that's the part that makes people uncomfortable. A person who is genuinely content alone is difficult to pressure. They don't need to settle simply because everyone else thinks they should. They don't have to fill every quiet moment. They don't have to treat singleness like a waiting room before real life begins. Because for them, real life is already happening. So when you see a man living alone, don't automatically assume you're looking at loneliness. You might be looking at independence. You might be looking at emotional stability. You might be looking at someone who knows exactly what he wants and refuses to accept less simply to avoid being by himself. Or maybe you're simply looking at a man who has learned something many people spend years trying to discover: how to be completely comfortable in his own company.